be polite and welcome our guests to the stage. And Gerard, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
As Kim mentioned, we've had a lot of questions from members that they want to ask you. I don't intend to do a Jeremy of Islington session, if that's all right. I've kind of distilled everything that they've asked you, so I'll just put the questions kind of from me, but they were reflecting the concerns. They are reflecting the concerns that they put to me. First off, the white paper. I think it's fair to say, Nick, that it hasn't been greeted with universal acclaim. In particular, the proposal that all schools should become academies be forced to become academies. Given the reaction, and in retrospect, do you regret the rush to forced academisation?
Well, white papers are rarely uncontroversial, particularly in education. But we had an issue to address. At the moment, 65% of secondary schools are academies. We have 5,000 academies today, 1,500 sponsored academies, the rest are converter academies. And if you think back 5 years ago, where we were in terms of academies, there were just 200 academies in 2010, now there are 5,000. And we looked ahead, where are we going to be in 5 or 6 years' time from now? And it was clear that with current trends, there will be a lot of local authorities up and down the country with very few maintained schools under their oversight. And there is an issue about sustainability, whether that model was sustainable. So we, as a government, we have to plan ahead to see what the landscape is going to look like. And it was very clear we had to have a plan for how you tackle a situation where 3/4 of all schools, for example, are academies, and how then do you have a local authority system with the resources and critical mass to be able to have a school improvement service, for example, that was sustainable in the long run. And that's why we took a decision that by 2020, all schools would have a plan, would either be academies or would have a plan to become an academy. And by 2022, all schools will be academies. So we're talking about 6 years from now. This is a long period of time when you consider what we've achieved in terms of academisation over the last 5 years.
But it's not just the usual suspects, is it, who are against this proposal? I mean, we've had Tory councillors, we've had FASNA, we've had the Bow Group, I mean, Graham Brady, who's hardly the most radical Corbynista, come out against it. I mean, surely the breadth and depth of opposition, even on your own backbenches, does give you some cause for concern.
Well, I'm spending time talking to colleagues who have expressed a concern. But as I say, the Multi-Academy Trust, the whole Academies programme, is about having a profession-led system so that the profession is in charge of the running of academies and not local authority officials. That's the system we're moving to. And if you talk to head teachers who've become heads of academies, they have flourished running their academies. And now the opportunities to go beyond being a head teacher to running a multi-academy trust. A lot of multi-academy trusts are run by experienced head teachers, and they enjoy that challenge. And
but with respect, Nick, there's no actual evidence that they're any better than local authority schools.
Well, if you look at I think the head teachers that run academies would beg to differ. But if you look at primary schools, sponsored primary schools, their results, if they've been open for 2 years, are 10 percentage points, are improving at 10 percentage points faster than non.
But we can all pick and choose. I mean, you can say those who are sponsored for 5 years are doing worse. I mean, the fact is, there are many people out there, even outside the education system, parents in particular, do not understand why their good local school, if it's doing well and is run well by the local authority, should be forced to convert.
There's nothing to prevent those officials, those officers in those local authorities from establishing a multi-academy trust themselves. And what's good about the multi-academy trust system is that it goes beyond local authority geographical borders. We've got multi-academy trusts that have clusters around the country. It improves and it institutionalizes professional collaboration between teachers. So the system, I believe, is working. I could take you to some of the most successful multi-academy trusts that have taken schools that have been underperforming for years and years, and within a couple of years they've transformed from schools in special measures to schools that are outstanding. And that's the model we want to create up and down the country.
Can I just ask conference to be polite when responding? The point is that they don't. A lot of people don't understand why it's so much. It's a better model when the evidence isn't there. It just isn't there.
Well, we're in a transition period, and if you look at, I can tell you.
Why not, for instance, why not make it voluntary? Why not basically say, actually, wouldn't it be far better?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be far better to work on improving the mats that we have? And let's face it, a lot of them have issues. I mean, Ofsted came out only last month saying that 7 of them were some of the 7 worst academy chains were exhibited all the worst behaviour of local authority schools.
Yes, and those underperforming academy chains, we're taking very swift action to deal with them. But you say, why not make this voluntary? Well, it's been voluntary for the last 5 years, and it is in essence voluntary for the next few years. What we're saying is that by 2020 and 2022, which is 6 years from now, we have to have a system in place that tackles the issue of what you do when the majority of local authorities have so few maintained schools in their oversight, of which they're responsible, that they don't have a critical mass that means that they are sustainable in the long run. We, as a government, have to have a plan of how we tackle that issue.
So it's about rationalisation more than anything else.
It is about making sure we don't have 2 systems of oversight, one of which is not sustainable because the proportion of schools that have become academies is so high that it's just not sustainable in the long run. That's what a responsible government has to tackle. And I know these issues are controversial. We didn't go into this not realising that it wasn't controversial, but that is the only sensible way to have an oversight system that's sustainable in the long run.
You mentioned local authorities actually becoming their own trusts or actually setting up organisations which will become their own trusts.
Yes.
I think Camden is making moves to do that kind of thing. Is that a development that you would support?
Yes, the individuals in those departments can establish a mutual to become a multi-academy trust. Then that multi-academy trust was subject to the same accountability measures that we're applying to all multi-academy trusts.
Okay, and what about the parental concerns that have been expressed? I think the Secretary of State went on Mumsnet recently and got a bit of a grilling from members of the public who did not understand, for the same reasons that some of the delegates here do not understand either, why their schools, their good local schools, should become academies. And I think one of the concerns is that it seems so distant. Matt seems so distant. Parental involvement, local involvement will be a thing of the past, and there are these faceless chains which are not accountable to the local community, and people don't like that, and that's understandable, isn't it?
Well, we are imposing on academies in the white paper greater engagement with parents. We're introducing a parent portal. We're requiring them to provide more information to parents than before and to involve and have discussions with parents. Now, there is the issue of parent governors, and there's nothing in the white paper that says that parents shouldn't be governors. What the white paper is proposing is that in order to improve governance of academies and multi-academy trusts, we need to make sure that they have the flexibility to be able to appoint on the basis of the expertise and skills of the individuals. Now, you could have a whole governing body made up of parents, but it just gives the academy the flexibility to appoint on the basis of skills rather than representative basis. And of course, this again is voluntary. If they want to keep the representative model, they can also do so. But actually having one parent on a board of governors doesn't necessarily mean the school is responsive to parental concerns. And that's why we're proposing to legislate to ensure that academies are taking into account parents' concerns and views.
Let's talk a bit about admissions. I think there was a bit in the white paper which proposed that LAs could have a more overarching role. It's open to consultation, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a development you'd like to see, that actually LAs were the ultimate admissions authority for all types of schools?
Well, we'll look at that issue, but the issue really is about in-year admissions and making sure that we have an efficient administration of the admissions process.
Because, well, as you know, one of the concerns, another concern that people have, is that academies often, so people say, exclude people that they find difficult to teach. And there's increased fears in a more atomised system. Those kids that are difficult to teach for whatever reason or disadvantaged will suffer.
Well, the legislation is very clear that all academies are subject to the admissions code and they're all subject to the Fair Access Protocol. And when you have a system where increasing numbers of academies schools are academies, then of course it will be inevitable that some academies will have to take children with all kinds of challenges, and that is right and proper. But the law is very clear that the Fair Access Protocol applies to academies just as much to maintain schools.
What about the cost? Labour has said that the cost is far bigger than the 140 million I think you set aside for conversion. They're spending a figure of 1.3 billion. Is that right?
They're not right because they haven't taken into account the funding that was made available in the spending review. And that was designed, the spending review towards the end of last year dealt with the costs of conversion as a consequence of the Education and Adoption Bill, which tackled the issue of failing schools, the automatic conversion for schools in special measures, and the plans to deal with coasting schools that might lead to academisation or they might not. But the funding for that element of conversion was in the spending review, and Labour, when they did their calculations, didn't look at that when they calculated the cost of converting all schools to
How much
academies.
is it?
Well, we're talking about very significant sums of money, in hundreds of millions of pounds, that have been allocated to tackling coasting schools, to tackling underperforming schools, and to tackle the cost of conversion.
Okay. Another concern that I know people in this room have is the pay that chief executives of some academy chains are free to pay themselves. The TS last week pointed out significant numbers of heads and salaries much higher than the Prime Minister. Ofsted has also raised concerns about there seems to be no link between pay and performance. Is that a concern you share?
Yes, we want there to be more autonomy in terms of decision-making in the academy system. That's the essence of the academies programme, more autonomy in the running of schools, in the running of academies. And people will make mistakes from time to time, but we have a much more rigorous now scrutiny of academies than there has been over maintained schools. So, for example, academies are required to publish financial accounts every year. There's a very detailed financial control handbook produced by the Education and Funding Agency. So the scrutiny is much greater than it's ever been. And that's why some of these issues come to light, because of the scrutiny, because of taking seriously and acting swiftly on whistleblowing. And so this scrutiny will ensure that these issues are brought to light. Transparency is the greatest disinfectant, actually.
But as you know, there are CEOs of academy chains out there that you would dearly love to see the back of, and you can't get rid of them. It's easier getting rid of the House of Windsor than it is some executive academy chain. I mean, in that case, you clearly do not have as much control as you did, and there isn't the mechanisms to make sure that you can get rid of bad apples, is there?
Well, the powers that we've taken in the recent Act do give us more control over academies that are underperforming, and underperforming can include their financial control. So we have financial notices to improve. And so one of the key things that we took in the Education and Adoption Bill, now an Act, was ensuring that we had the power to tackle underperformance in academies, even for those academies with the old funding agreements where the powers for the Secretary of State were much less than they are in the modern funding agreements. And that's the power that we will be using to deal with underperformance, wherever it lies.
And what about pay? Pay for the vast majority of teachers. Obviously, academies are free to set their own rates of pay. You know that actually pension contributions will rise by 1 or 2% over the coming years. budgets are tight. Can you give any assurance to conference here that there won't be a big squeeze on pay in academy chains?
Well, when you have a system where we're talking about recruitment and the challenges that schools are facing with recruitment, that isn't a system that's gearing itself up to pay less. There are constraints on budgets.
So they heard it here first. I mean, Minister says pay bonanza around the corner.
That's not what I said, Gerald. You are, yes, typical TES. But no, there are, you know, we all know the issue that the government's having to tackle. The budget deficit is a serious issue. We had an 11% budget deficit. 11% of our GDP was 1 year's excess income, expenditure over income. We had to tackle that. We brought that down very significantly. We've halved that budget deficit over the years, and we plan to take it down to eliminate it over the next few years. And we have to do that in order to ensure we have a strong economy, and what we want to ensure is that youngsters leaving the school system have the opportunities of a job in a dynamic, strong economy. It's absolutely critical that we continue to do that. And right across Whitehall, there have been very significant cuts in public spending in order to deliver that. Now, what we've managed to achieve in our negotiations with the Treasury on schools, both in the last Parliament where we protected school funding on the basis of the flat cash per pupil, so as pupil numbers go up, so has funding going up. And in this Parliament, the same, flat cash per pupil, so as pupil numbers go up, which they have done and they are doing, so will funding for schools. And overall, we've maintained spending in real terms. But I absolutely accept that with all the added costs of pension contributions, of national insurance, of the pay rise, that will add costs to schools, and it will be a challenge for schools to manage those budgets. But it's a challenge right across the state sector we've had to manage, and we are helping schools to find ways of procuring more efficiently, to learn from best practice, and there's all kinds of advice available for head teachers about how they can manage their budgets under this tight budget constraints.
You mentioned recruitment. Do you now accept there is a recruitment crisis?
I think there is a challenge because over the last 5 years, we've created 450,000 new school places over just the last 5 years. And every one of those places needs a teacher to teach the children in those places. So since 2010, there's been an increase in the number of teachers by about 13,000, but that really keeps pace with those extra 450,000 school places. So we've had that challenge to deal with. On top of that, we have a strong economy over the last 5 years. Despite the huge financial crisis in 2008-09 and the recession that existed when we came into office, we have had a very strong economic growth over the last 5 years, and it's projected to continue. And that means that the graduate market is increasingly tight, and it's increasingly challenging to be able to recruit graduates from that graduate market. So tackling those joint problems has been an issue for us. Now, we haven't just sort of sat back and said we don't think there's a problem. We have taken every measure possible to deal with this issue. We have introduced very generous bursaries. We're spending, £300 million a year to try to encourage graduates to come into teaching, £30,000 tax-free for some top graduates and so on. We've had a very effective advertising campaign that we're deploying. We've expanded all kinds of schemes like Teach First. We've introduced the teaching scholars to encourage A-level students to come into teaching. Whenever I talk to audiences of young people, I talk about the opportunities available now in teaching for young people to come into the teaching profession. And, we are tackling those issues that actually are a deterrent for people to come into teaching, like pupil behaviour, like issues of workload. We are taking the workload issue extremely seriously, and no doubt you'll come on to...
I will come to workload in a second.
So all those issues that have deterred people from coming into the profession, we are talking about and tackling. But I do accept, I talk to head teachers all the time, and they tell me how difficult it is to recruit maths teachers, to recruit modern foreign language teachers, to recruit primary school teachers. We are aware, and we are doing everything we can to improve teacher recruitment and people coming into the profession.
But it's a challenge, not a crisis.
Yes, and I think it's important. Well, the National Audit Office report that came out about this issue spoke about the fact that we have managed, despite
11% rise of teachers leaving the profession between 2011 and 14.
But that's lower than people leaving other similar walks of life. There are always going to be people leaving the profession. And actually, the numbers returning to teaching, 14,000 people returned to teaching last year, and that's higher, and it's been improving every year since 2010. So I don't think we should be talking down the teaching profession, Gerard. You know, there are more people in the teaching profession today. 455,000 people are in teaching today. That's the highest number of all time in teaching. More people are returning to the teaching profession. It's a great profession to be in, and whenever I talk to audiences, that's the message that I convey, and I think we all need to do the same.
Given the challenges, some of which, as you admitted, were foreseeable, like rising the birth rate and all the rest of it, was it then, therefore, a mistake to dismantle the initial teacher training programme and the strategies? So we have now basically areas of the country, as you know, without good or outstanding schools. They can't have teaching schools in those areas, and those are precisely often those areas that need teachers most. I mean, it just seems to be that strategy, when it comes to teacher recruitment, was sacrificed on an ideological altar, and now we're paying the price.
No. The School Direct programme is not the reason why there's been a challenge in recruiting graduates into maths and to physics. Those are historical challenges for teaching, because everybody wants maths graduates, not just in teaching. They want it in the City of London, they want it in industry, and the same for physics graduates. And with modern foreign language graduates, there has been a decline in the number of graduates by about a third as a consequence of the decision taken in 2004 not to have compulsory foreign languages through to GCSE and Key Stage 4. So these issues are not about the changing to giving more schools more control over their recruitment. Actually, that is a way of finding other routes into teaching. There are several routes now into teaching, and that is about making sure we can tap in to every graduate, every career changer, to make sure there is a route suitable for them. It's not about ideological opposition to a certain approach to recruiting teachers into the system. We are doing everything we can to encourage graduates to come into teaching. And actually this year we've managed to recruit more graduates into initial teacher training than last year. And I think that is a consequence of some of the activity we have been engaged in.
You also mentioned workload. Now, according to an ATL survey of teachers who are considered leaving the profession, almost 9 in 10 cited workload as the main reason why they were leaving. Who's to blame for the increase in workload?
Well, we take this issue seriously, and we were first alerted to it by the TALIS survey. And the TALIS survey, the OECD TALIS survey, showed that, on average, teachers in this country work 46 hours a week, compared with on average, I'm sure everybody here works longer than that, compared with the OECD average of 38 hours a week. And yet the hours in front of the classroom were the same in this country as they are the OECD average.
What's the trend?
So I don't know what the trend is, but that was enough to worry us. And the difference, those 8 hours were not extra hours spent teaching in front of the classroom. So what were teachers spending those 8 hours on? And it's those 8 hours that we're concerned about, because we don't believe that those are the hours that are leading productive. Now, we then conducted the workload challenge. So we asked people, what are the drivers of excess workload of the teaching profession? And 44,000 I think we did that under the coalition issue. But the
It's the Lib Dems' fault then. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
44,000 people responded. And the top 3 issues were data collection, preparation, and marking. So we set up 3 working parties to look at those 3 issues. So first of all, in immediate response, we gave us a commitment to a 12 months lead-in time for any important reforms. But also, we set up these working groups, and they have now reported. And they are, I think they will change things in our schools. They will change this attitude towards marking. Marking should not be this deep marking that takes 5-10 minutes for every piece of work. Data collection should be data that's needed by the school, not to feed the data monster. And things like preparation time. We need to make sure that I heard the newly qualified the teacher trainee in his speech just now talking about the pressures put on to newly qualified teachers in terms of lesson planning and so on. That there needs to be far more school-led delivery of resources for teachers at the beginning of term to make sure that they don't have those kinds of burdens. So those were led by very experienced head teachers, those 3 workload review groups, and we're looking at their reports now. They've just reported. We're looking at them in great detail, and I hope they will change the zeitgeist so much that actually we will eliminate the excessive amounts of pressure that are put on teachers in those 3 areas in particular.
But of course, in an atomised system, you have very few levers of control when it comes to workload. Is that right?
Well, 'twas ever thus, and you know, one of the issues is Ofsted. You know, what are they demanding? And we've worked very closely with Ofsted over the last few years, particularly with Sean Harford, about myth busting and saying that Ofsted doesn't really require these things. There is no Ofsted prescribed format of lessons. And we're working with them continually to make sure that there's no a chink of light in the armour that is where inspectors are going in saying, where is your data that demonstrates this or that? Where are your written lesson plans? And if we can make sure that Ofsted isn't demanding things, and you combine that with the evidence from the workload review groups, I think we will change what happens out in the system.
Generally, do you think teachers complain too much? You're among friends, be honest.
No. I mean, I work very closely with all the general secretaries of the trade union, the teacher unions, even Mary and I. We work especially very closely with Mary. And, you know, this is the role of teacher unions. It is to highlight in an imaginative way as possible, with the maximum publicity as possible, to make sure that concerns are raised with those people that make policy. We need to know the problems. And we, you know, despite views to the contrary, we do our best to address those concerns. We're not sitting here finding ways to make life more difficult. We are charged with the responsibility of ensuring we have an education system that equips our young people for the challenges of the modern world. And we are living in an increasingly competitive global business, economic market, jobs market. And we need to make sure that young people leave our school system equipped for life in modern Britain, equipped for the demands of a global economy. So that's our responsibility, and we need to make sure that we deliver those policy changes you know, by discussing with teachers as much as possible as we develop those policies. And we do consult very extensively on every policy change. We have a huge range of reference groups, teacher reference groups, head teacher reference groups that we consult policies on. We put leading teachers onto panels, to head panels, to make sure that our policy development does reflect the needs and concerns of the profession.
Ofsted, there were reports before the election that you personally were pressing for it to be abolished. Is that correct?
No, I don't know where these views come from. There is an issue about Ofsted. My concern about Ofsted sometimes is that you know, you have inspectors going into schools with a set view about what a school should look like, and then they tell teachers that they should teach in their way, and that is not what you want in a mature profession. We can't have Ofsted having its own view about how to teach a tripartite lesson. You must use green ink, not red ink. You know, you must have group work or not group work. Too much teacher talk or not enough teacher talk. These are issues for the profession. And I know that there's skepticism when I say this, but we do want to have a mature profession in charge of its own destiny, that uses evidence for its approach to teaching and not the latest fad that emanates from Ofsted. And it worries me in the years since Ofsted was established that actually some of the things that they have been telling schools to do are not based on what the evidence says is the most effective. And that's my concern. That has always been my concern about Ofsted. And we want to make sure, we said in the manifesto, we want to lighten the burden that Ofsted imposes on schools. We do want to do that. But also we need to make sure that Ofsted isn't undermining the professional autonomy of the teaching profession.
So you would like to see a slimmed down version? Or do you think they've got it more or less right? They've just brought in a new framework, a light touch approach. Is that more or less going in the right direction? Do you think they're there yet?
Well, a huge, I mean, Sir Michael Wilshaw has delivered huge reform over the last few years since he was appointed. They have dismantled this approach of using the subcontractors, the SERCOs and so on, and the inspectors are now in-house. I think we're getting a higher calibre of inspectors in our inspection system. There's a framework now that looks more at outputs than inputs, which I think is absolutely right. And there are myth busters where, you know, and I've heard people that have been on the inspector training now, and it's far more in line with what I think should be happening. That we need to look at the outputs and not have an Ofsted approach to inputs.
But there's an awful lot of confusion out there, Nick, with between the role of the new regional schools commissioners and Ofsted. You get regional schools commissioners, I've heard from various school groups saying that they act like mini Ofsteds, and then one RSC would give completely contrary advice to another RSC. That's a real problem, isn't it?
Well, again, the Regional Schools Commissioners is a new innovation, and it's settling down, and it's learning itself how to operate. The reason why we introduced the Regional Schools Commissioners was that we didn't want there to be a Whitehall-centric approach to monitoring the coasting schools issue and the failing schools issue. We needed to make sure that there was local knowledge. And each of these regional schools commissioners is advised by a head teacher board made up of prominent local head teachers. And I think that is the right approach to monitoring underperformance. And it is a management by exception. For those academies and multi-academy trusts that are excelling, there's no need for there to be any involvement with the regional schools commissioners. They are designed to identify underperformance and to tackle underperformance, not to have a day-by-day scrutiny of how are you teaching maths and how are you teaching reading. They shouldn't be involved in that kind of approach.
I want to move on to the curriculum and assessment because I know time is limited. The Key Stage 2 writing exemplification was a challenge for many schools this year. Delays, clarifications didn't clarify. What went wrong?
Something did go wrong, there's no question about that. And I'll preface my answer by saying that I am absolutely aware, as is the Secretary of State, of the huge challenge that the 5 years of reform that are now really coming into force now, essentially, have presented. The primary curriculum in English and maths is significantly more demanding than it has been in the past. There's a reason for that. As I said, you know, we have to make sure that our education system is keeping pace with the reforms that are happening throughout the world. But I realise that everything is now coming into fruition this May for the first time that we're assessing the delivery of that new primary curriculum that was first published in 2013, which came to force in 2014. So we're absolutely aware of the challenges. In terms of the assessment itself, there were mistakes made. There's no question about that. And one of the mistakes was made was the way that the exemplification material was published between Morgan and Lee. And people were led to believe, and it was our fault, that Lee was the standard, the expected standard that people were aiming at. But actually Lee was within the expected standard, but he or she was at the top end of that expected standard, not at the bottom. Whereas Morgan was the child's work that had just gone into the expected standard. And it's that should have been the focus of people's minds, not Lee. That was an error, and that's why it was clarified.
When it comes to GCSEs and A-levels, major changes also in the pipeline due to impact next year. But I understand that course details of 39 AS and A-levels and 18 GCSEs aren't even out yet. So how can you expect teachers to cope when they've basically got to pick up the ball from September?
Yes, again, it has been a very rapid period of reform over the last 5 years. It's taken us actually 5 years to get to this point with the new GCSEs coming through. That's how long it takes, because there's a lot of preparation time, there's a lot of consultation that happens. In terms of the GCSE specifications, there is now at least one awarding organisation's specification in place for every GCSE subject, and in most GCSE subjects there are more than one, and in many cases all the boards have got their specifications done. And to get to that point has been hard work. We've put huge pressure on, I personally have put huge pressure on the awarding organisations and on Ofqual to make sure that they deliver on time so that schools have time to prepare for those new specifications. The subject content and draft specifications have been out for a longer period, but I do know that schools want to see the final version as soon as possible. At A level, we have specifications for all the subjects. The big challenge now is modern foreign languages and religious studies, and I'm optimistic about those subjects as well.
I understand why the government is so keen on curriculum and assessment reform, but I'm worried, and I'm sure people in the room are worried, that actually you might be in danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Let me just read something that I saw in the TS last week from a teacher. It was a Year 6 teacher. A child in our school who achieved a level 6 in grammar, punctuation and spelling last year with virtually full marks sat the sample test and only achieved 22 out of 50, which would indicate that she will probably not currently meet expected standards. Tests that reduce an able pupil to a failure, we've got a real problem. It's not only wrong, it seems daft and vindictive.
Well, you don't know. You don't know.
But even
You don't know, Gerard, where the line will be drawn for expected standard. That is a mathematical issue, and it's delivered. It will be, you look at the results as a whole when they come in, and so you look at that, and you combine that with a teachers' panel to determine where the cutoff comes. So, and the other thing to bear in mind about these tests this year is that they have to incorporate the whole ability range. So what were level 6 tests are now have to be incorporated in these tests. So there will be questions at the top end of all these assessments that are challenging and are beyond the ability of most children, because they're designed to be able to measure progress. And we've been determined to make the accountability regime for schools much fairer. So rather than looking at simple absolute attainment, we're now measuring progress. And if you want to measure progress fairly, there has to be scope for the most able children to get those extra top marks. Otherwise, if you've got children coming in who are very able and perform highly on those baseline assessments, the school won't benefit if they can't demonstrate progress for that child. So that's why those tests have some questions that really are extremely challenging. Now, I've been worried about the challenge of assessments, I have to admit, and I push back, and I ask experts, and I ask advisors, are these questions too challenging? And the answer I get is that if they're taught, they're not challenging for children. That's what I'm told. And when you think about the challenges that schools are facing, the primary school, the prize is phenomenal. We could have a system in a few years' time where every child leaves primary school fluent in reading, where every child leaves primary school fluent in arithmetic and knowing their tables. And for the first time in many generations, you'll have children who are knowledgeable about the structure of language and grammar and punctuation. Now, that is a wonderful achievement that our school system will be delivering in the next few years. It means that they'll find foreign language teaching and learning easier at secondary school and at primary school. It means that they will start the secondary maths curriculum better prepared than ever before. And if we can, just give me I'll give you one example of what's been achieved over the last 5 years, and that's with reading. I know Mary's going to roll her eyes because I'm going to mention the P word. But as a consequence of the phonics changes, when we brought the phonics check in 2012, 58% passed that check. Last year, 77% passed it. Now that's equal to 120,000 6-year-olds this year reading more effectively than if we hadn't have introduced those reforms. 120,000 children out of 600,000. That is a wonderful achievement that I didn't deliver, The school system delivered, the teachers in those primary schools delivered that. And I think it's a wonderful achievement. And it will absolutely transform the lives of those 120,000 children.
I'm glad you mentioned Mary, who's sitting very unusually quietly in the front there, on the whole. When she raised the issue of girls being labelled as SWATs last week and general victims of bullying in the classroom, your department responded with the curious phrase, "It's stories like this, with no evidence to back them up, that are exactly why sexism still exists." Really?
Well,
Did Mary pointing out the problem cause a problem, or is there not a problem?
there is an issue, and if you look at the actual data, and I think that was the issue about the quotation, it's about making sure you look at data. And one of the pieces of data that worries me most is that if you take children that get an A star, for example, in physics, if you're a girl, you are significantly less likely to continue to take physics at A level than if you are a boy. The figures are astonishingly different between the proportion of A star GCSE physics achievers compared with girls going. And that is something we are absolutely determined to address. There's no reason why that happens other than the issues that Mary highlighted. I think the quote was about using anecdote rather than data, but we are determined to tackle this issue. We can't have bullying in our schools, whether it's of girls or boys, and I think we've done quite a lot to try and tackle that. But we need to make sure that all our schools have this ethos of hard work. And whether it's academic hard work or application in sport or the arts or music, or just being hardworking generally and contributing to school life. We want the ethos to be that if you work hard and put a lot into your school life as a child, that will be something that we reward in our school. And that's the ethos we need to create in our schools.
We're more or less at the end of our session. I can't believe I've gone half an hour without mentioning fronted adverbials. But anyway, well, I won't even mention exclamation marks. I mean, just one final question. You might have heard talk around of the ATL and the NUT having talks about joining together. It's not a merger, it's more of a liaison, I understand, but getting together into a bigger organisation. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's a matter for you, for the unions. I have no issue with it one way or the other. I've enjoyed working with Mary Bousted over the years.
So as long as she's General Secretary, you're fine with it.
I've enjoyed working with Christine Blower over the years. So I wish the unions every success in the future. They have an important role to play in highlighting the concerns of the profession. I've always been determined in both my iterations as a schools minister to work closely with the unions and to have a close dialogue so that I'm aware of what the concerns are. And actually, due to our discussions that we have, sometimes we're able to change policy before it's announced so that it's more effective when it's delivered.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Conference.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Gerard. As we